This is the Impunity Observer podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host. I'm so pleased to be with you on our monthly live stream with my co-host and colleague, Steve Hecht. And we are a geopolitical intelligence service focused on the nexus between Anglo and Latin America. And I just see the live stream started. There was a little bit of a delay where this is the Impunity Observer monthly live stream. I'm your co-host, Fergus Hodgson, with Steve Hecht. And our website is impunityobserver.com. Go there for all our social media, real-time updates. We focus on the rule of law and aligning Latin American and U.S. interests. And every month we get together to discuss all the work that's been going on. We've got a ton of it. If you're not on our e-newsletter list, get on that, and you'll get our monthly update there too with all the articles. Steve has written 3 articles with BizPac Review and republished on the Impunity Observer. So, Steve, the latest one, which is the freshest in our mind, is the path to totalitarianism is paved with lies, and specifically the lies that are going on in the Democratic Party in the United States. But let's define for people what the fear is. Obviously, you're concerned about rising centralization, rising or descending nature of the republic. Let's hit us with what totalitarianism is in the U.S. context, please.
Well, totalitarianism is where you have centralized power that's applied arbitrarily. And totalitarianism is one big lie, and it lives on lies, and it can't afford to have people telling the truth. So it has to shut them up. And if you look at has been going on in the United States, that's exactly what's happening. That the government has gotten together with large corporate interests, and they're imposing ideology on companies, on people. People are afraid to say what they want to say. They think they get fired. The way they call it in the United States now is get canceled. So there's a lot of pressure on people not to say what they want to say, to conform. That is imposition of lies. And we can't have that. And if that keeps going, we're going to lose our liberty and become a totalitarian state.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on this article, and I mentioned that people who escape tyranny escape a world of lies. And I was specifically thinking of Cuba, where they literally have just a couple of channels of very limited coverage. So people there grow up literally in a scenario with deceit all around them. And when they get out, they can see the truth or look back. Now, I pushed you when we were working on this article. I pushed you to say, how is this different? How is the dishonesty or deceit in the U.S. federal government more severe or more profound or meaningfully different from in the past?
Because it's official government policy. I mean, you have corruption that exists in every country in the world, and people, of course, don't want their corruption revealed. But in this case, it's much, much worse than that. Every single policy of the government is a lie, and they ram it down your throat. And if you look, for instance, at Twitter, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, the administration and all of its partners were very upset because that had a lot of danger. And now we know that the FBI was working closely with Twitter to suppress speech, specific speech that it suppressed, the Hunter Biden laptop. That's probably the most notorious. It's about, there's a survey that shows 17% of Biden voters, had they had that information, wouldn't have voted for Biden. So Trump would have been president. So what you have is that the large companies, I call them oligarchs, who make their money overseas, especially in China, they don't want Trump's China policy because that creates a level playing field. And they benefit from the current situation where China has the advantages because they have big interest in China. And so these companies are colluding with the government. They're partners. They help put Biden in power. And so now you got a cooperation among the Democrat Party the large companies, corporate interests, and the federal bureaucracy. They all have an interest in perpetuating the lie and perpetuating their own power at the expense of American liberty.
Yeah, and you gave one example which listeners will be familiar with, which is one that concerns me also. The way that this whole movement to erase gender, erase the differences between men and women as though we're just the same thing or you can choose, as this official policy. So there was one particular instance recently where representatives in the House tried to stop this, to basically keep, let's say, the protection of women's sports away from biological men. And they actually won in the House narrowly, but this is going nowhere. So do you want to clarify why you think this was a particularly symbolic moment?
Sure, because the House voted, I believe it was 219 to 203. So that means that not every Republican, not every Democrat was there, but 100% of the Democrats present voted against this. And the act just simply bans people who were born male from female sports. That's simple. And how can you have every single Democrat vote against that? Senate's not going to pass it for the same reason. Biden already said he would veto it if it got to his desk. And so that means that they don't know the difference between men and women. Who doesn't know the difference between men and women? What human being alive doesn't know that a man competing physically with a woman has all the advantages? And so it's even dangerous for women because, you know, you see there's an example, some poor girl got her face mangled by a man claiming to be a woman who spiked a volleyball smack in her face, a volleyball. And she had concussion and she had lacerations. And if it were another woman, women doesn't have that kind of power. So it's much less likely. So women are deprived of their rights by this bill. And it's a clear lie that men and women are the same, that men can become women if they want to. No way. It can't happen. Any human being understands that. So the lie is so blatant, it's so obvious that it was a great example.
Yeah, I tend to agree, Steve, that we've reached a level of, let's say, reality denial that is hard to comprehend. It's so, like you said, so open, so blatant that anyone can look at it and scratch his head. Now, there was one other example about not only is there flagrant deceit or denial of reality right in front of our face, there is also no real accountability, no real pushback. And you mentioned the way that, what was it, 50 years ago now, Richard Nixon, when he engaged in deceit or corruption, his own party forced him out. And you just think that would never happen now.
Well, that's correct. And the point that I made in the article that you just hit on is that this movement that supports the totalitarians, it not only denies reality, it's simply postmodern. They believe that you can make your own reality. They deny objective reality. So whatever you want to believe is reality. Now, every human being knows that's not true. And if you don't believe that, identify as a bird and fly off the roof of your building and see what happens. And everybody knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
gravity is an immutable law. That's it.
Yeah.
And so is men created as men and women created as women. We don't have the power to change that. So by trying to change these things, we are crashing on the rocks of reality. But that's what the government does. And for them, if you don't agree with their unrealistic, false narratives, then you are a subversive. And they've proven that. They sent the FBI to investigate parents who think their children are being propagandized, investigate them as domestic terrorists. In other words, we are facing a totalitarian government right here, right now. And Nixon, to go back to what you asked about, Nixon, he just simply got ran out by his own people. And the main thing that he did was abuse of power, tried to use the CIA to stop an FBI investigation, tried to obstruct an FBI investigation, and he tried to hide his own culpability in the cover up. He had nothing to do whatsoever with the break in itself that was at the core of that thing, but he was directing the cover up. He committed crimes, and Republicans in the Senate and the House weren't going to stand by and let that happen. And they were willing to let the Democrats gain politically because they had to stop a threat to the country. One of the things Nixon did was use the IRS against his political opponents. Well, guess what? That's a staple of the Biden administration. Obama did it. Lois Lerner got away with it. Eric Holder was cited for contempt. He got away with it. They all get away with it. And now here's Biden. 87,000 new IRS agents. And what do you think they're for? Biden said to make the rich people pay their taxes. Rich people have armies of tax lawyers. They're not going to pay more taxes. Those 87,000 new agents are to harass the Democrats' political opponent. They're making it too expensive, too costly for people to speak their mind and to organize and to resist the government's totalitarian takeover. That's what those agents are for. And our people, even people who oppose Democrats, who even think they're Republican, they don't understand. They don't want to understand. The American public is in deep trouble because it doesn't want to understand this totalitarianism.
Yeah, gosh, Steve, you're really breaking my heart there, because it is accurate that the IRS is becoming an enforcement arm of the federal government, not to collect taxes, but to enforce compliance with the broader regime. And this, you touched a little bit upon, well, inadvertently, basically the very definition of political correctness. Political correctness is something that we all know to be untrue, but which people claim to be true for political purposes. And this denial of gender, or pretending that men are women, is that exactly that, where everybody knows it's not true, but for some political reasons, whether it's to sow discord, to get us against each other, whether it's to curry favor with certain interest groups, whatever, it is politically correct, so that even the people who promote it don't really believe it. At least, and so we do have a situation where, like you said, we have a federal government which has become blatantly anti-reality, and then not only anti-reality, it is enforcing this. Now, you didn't go into this in your article, but do you want to touch upon this canceling? So yes, there's almost like a soft censorship or a self-censorship given intimidation. Are there any other techniques aside from the IRS you want to touch upon?
Well, there are all kinds of them. Really, the psychological thing, and I wrote about it in a previous article, is the demonization. And the reason that they demonize is, well, number one, it distracts, but they need to keep people fighting, keep groups fighting, and keep people fearful, angry, agitated. And that way, critical thinking disappears. They must suppress critical thinking, because anybody who engages in any type of critical thinking realizes the difference between men and women. And so they have to make their people feel like, no, you can't even consider what the evil one says, because the evil one is going to take away all of your freedoms. So they call Trump a dictator. They call January 6th an insurrection. That's a huge lie. And they managed to hide that because they control the press. And when somebody comes with information that shows, I guarantee you it's a typical Marxist tactic. I will bet just about anything that it was Antifa and Black Lives Matter and the Democrat Party that set up January 6th. That's why Pelosi wouldn't take any National Guard. The mayor of Washington, D.C., who had authority, wouldn't take National Guard. They wanted that violence to occur so that then they could turn on the Republicans and claim MAGA extremists. Really? The extremists are sitting in the White House. They're the ones with the power. They're the ones distorting reality. They're the ones imposing lies. They're the one using government power to intimidate people into shutting up. And, if we, right now, we can still speak up. And if we don't realize it and we don't get together and we don't speak up, then we're not going to have those freedoms. We're going to lose them. People want abortion. Abortion was an issue in the last election. Well, guess what? If these people ever take complete power like they're trying to take, they'll force abortions on people. That's a whole different story. I don't think the Democrats who think a woman should have a right to an abortion, I don't think even they think that the government should be able to force anybody to have an abortion. So we're looking at tyranny right straight in the face. And we need to wake up to that tyranny. And you mentioned the House of Representatives. Look, they know perfectly well that that act about banning transgenders from women's sports, they know that's not going to become law. But the point is they have to educate the public. It's the same thing with their hearing in New York City on crime. They got roasted by the demonizing Democrats with their typical ad hominem attacks. And they say, oh, you're trying to be Trump's lawyer. Nothing to do with Trump. That DA in New York is absolutely representative of DAs that George Soros has backed all across the country. And what their policy is to persecute their political enemies and promote criminal activity. And so that criminal activity scares people. It creates uncertainty. This is a precursor to the iron hand of dictatorship. It's happened all throughout history. This is what they're attempting to do. And as long as people focus on their particular issues and debate their particular issues as if we're in a normal political situation, we're in trouble. You have to see past that. You have to understand these people are putting up one false narrative after another, and they're intimidating people. They're persecuting people so that they don't tell the truth. We need more people to step up and tell the truth. The U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives, is telling the truth. They're exposing the crime, and they need to, and they should. And the media is hiding those crimes because they don't want people to understand that this is purposeful. That if you want to stop the crime, if you want to be safe, you have to return to U.S. constitutional principles, and you have to have some responsibility. And that responsibility means being an informed citizen. You can't just trust the government. Any government, I don't care what government on the face of the earth. You don't trust it. You question it. You hold it to account. You hold it to the law. And that's not happening in the United States today. We need to start doing that, get back to it, like in the time of Nixon. There's no way that the Democrat Party would let Joe Biden would do to Joe Biden what the Republicans did to Richard Nixon, and Biden has done 100 times worse than what Richard Nixon did then.
Gosh, Steve, you touched on so many important points there. This one about demonization, I really want to make this clear to people why this is so crucial or so meaningful. All this demonization of the MAGA Republicans or whatever you want to call these people, this othering, it's setting them up to be victims. What I mean is that if you make people out to be such villains, even though they're not, when the unjust punishment comes, the public is more receptive to that. They just don't care about these people suffering. They don't realize that eventually that's going to come for them too. But in the meantime, these attacks, they pave the way for the lawfare, the unjust attack, the kind of mob rule, which unfortunately is becoming more common in the United States. Now, Steve, You mentioned some efforts to push back against, let's say, the centralization or the building of a one-party state in the United States. Do you want to touch upon what is actually being done? Are there fruitful efforts in this arena?
Well, sure. You got people all throughout the country, especially parents of children who became aware that their children are being propagandized. I mean, it's pretty outrageous that you could take a child, I'm not even talking about an adolescent, a child, and talk to that child about changing gender, and the parents have no rights. What are you, nuts? I mean, parents have legal rights till their children reach the age of majority, which in most cases is 18. And so this is a total outrage. And what they're doing is destroying. This is a totalitarian strategy. You have to destroy a country's morality. That whatever you want, when you want it, that is doable, and it's not doable. And if you're not anchored by timeless principles, which the United States was founded upon, those timeless principles. They're in our Declaration of Independence. You mentioned groups. In the United States, everybody's equal before the law. Now, that's an aspiration. In the real world, it's not possible. The other thing they like to do is make everybody equal in outcome, which is absolutely impossible. Reality doesn't permit that. And so you want to give people opportunities. And you can't do that if you divide them into groups, which is identity politics. That's at the core of this totalitarian strategy to undo our constitutional republic and replace it with a dictatorship. And if you look at what the Democrats did 2 years ago, the first act of the 2021, the 117th Congress, the first act was to pass a voting rights bill that would have federalized national elections, presidential and congressional elections. And that bill passed the House. And that bill is obviously unconstitutional. So how are they going to keep the bill from being declared unconstitutional? Simple. They're going to take over the Supreme Court. They're gonna vote to increase the number of justices, and then they're going to find justices that are political. They got plenty of those. There are lots of examples, and those justices will completely shred the Constitution, and they will make their own rules. The Constitution will no longer exist. This is what they're trying to do. So the Constitution gives the states the authority to pass electoral laws, and there are people who are concentrating on state level and tightening the laws and making it harder to commit fraud. That's all good. They should be doing that. But they have to be aware that the overall goal of these people is to undo the Constitution. So they can short circuit absolutely everything by passing that voting rights law. So if we elect these people, now they almost won for 5 votes, 5 seats in the House of Representatives. The Republicans have control, and control House of Representatives mean you control the agenda. What committees hear, who testifies, who's cited for contempt of Congress. All of that is controlled by the majority, which is now in the hands of Republicans. And the Republican House majority is using its power very wisely. It's showing the public, like with this law against transgender in sports, not going to pass, but it's showing the public this is what we have to do. With having a hearing in New York City to expose the purposeful coddling of criminals to create violence. This is really important that they do that. And the Democrats want to hide it. It's very clear. If you look at 2020, when after George Floyd, there was a riot. And those riots continued throughout the country from East Coast to West Coast until August. And in August, that when Democrats started getting hurt in the polls, that's when the riots stopped. You think that's a coincidence? No. What that tells you is when the riots were perceived to hurt Democrats, the riots stopped. So the rioters were involved with the Democrats. In other words, Antifa and Black Lives Matter are violent arms in the Democrat Party. And, that's process of of elimination. You can see it. You can easily make the case. But the Democrat politicians, like in that hearing in New York, they had to distract from it. They can't admit the lie. It's our job to expose the lie. In the House of Representatives, the leadership is helping us, is helping expose those lies. It's up to the people of the United States to regain some reason, some principle, and say, wait a minute, we're not going to take this anymore. We're going to stand up to this. We're not going to put up with our government violating the Constitution, colluding with the deep state, colluding with oligarchs who are giving all the advantages to China, and politicians who want to squash their opposition and impose totalitarianism on us. No, we got to stand up to that. We don't have enough people who are doing that.
Yeah, there's the note about Antifa and Black Lives Matter being arms of the Democratic Party or the federal government permanent bureaucracy is, to me, obvious to anyone who wants to take a closer look, in that they know they can go and act lawlessly and get away with it. That's sort of like a manifestation of their understanding that they're on the side of those in power. They're not really challenging power at all. Now, there's one point in your article which we haven't touched on yet about this particular moment in U.S. history being somewhat of a precipice. In other words, it's a sensitive moment. You use the term tipping point when the situation towards a more tyrannical, centralized, or one-party state in the United States, it can accelerate if not corrected at this moment. And as you've maybe touched upon, that's because as you get closer to that point, more and more people start to self-censor, more and more people start to curry favor with the regime, more and more people basically help it go even further as they sense it's just going to be the case, so they get on board, basically. If you can't fight it, join it, right? Now, do you want to touch upon this point, why you think this is a precipice or tipping point for the United States?
Yeah, it's reached a level that it's never reached before. So if you look back, like I just mentioned, 2 years ago, the Democrats tried to change the voting system and pack the Supreme Court. They failed because of 2 Democrat senators. Now, they needed to get those laws passed because their record is so bad that they're in danger of being defeated at the polls, even with the fraud that they commit. And they commit fraud across the board. They'll do everything and anything to steal elections because that's what totalitarians do. Read Saul Alinsky. It's a free election when we know that it's that our side is set to win.
Yeah, well, that's the case, Steve, because fundamentally, the tyrants need dishonesty because people don't want them, right? They have to trick people.
Right. That's exactly correct. If people knew the truth, if they told the truth, they could never win anything. And so you look at their record. They should have been wiped out in the midterms last November, but they weren't. They kept the Senate. Of course, talk to Mitch McConnell. He had something to do with that. And
sure.
and they barely lost the House. They should have been wiped out. If you look at the president, 1994, Bill Clinton got wiped out, huge margins, because he campaigned as a centrist and he governed from the left. In Barack Obama, the same thing, campaigned as a centrist and governed from the hard left. And Obama got wiped out in the 2010 midterms. That was when the Tea Party became a big thing. Well, this time they didn't get wiped out. And their record is much, much worse. The Biden regime is much more obviously a non-democratic, totalitarian, put it that way. And yet they almost kept the House of Representatives. If they had, we wouldn't have that women in barring transgender in sports. We wouldn't have had the hearing in New York about the crime of a rogue prosecutor that's put in office to create exactly that chaos. So right now, it's obvious to me anyway that Democrats have a chance to win next year. People think, oh, there's no way. Biden's old, he's incompetent, he's cognitively challenged, his record is awful. Yeah, it was last year too, but they still almost wiped the table. Now the demonization, they're increasing that demonization. And the more that they do that, the more they distract, and the more people let them distract. You want to make it about Donald Trump's personality? What would you rather have? Would you rather have Fidel Castro, Mao Zedong, Adolf Hitler, Daniel Ortega, Hugo Chavez? Would you rather have them governing you, or would you rather have Trump's mean tweets? So that's one of the stupidest things I ever heard, that people are paying attention to Donald Trump's personality. He never showed that he was a totalitarian in terms of actions, but these people show it every single day. And they demonstrate it, and they weaken us abroad, and they weaken us at home, and they do things that make absolutely no sense unless they're purposely trying to weaken the country and replace its constitutional government with a dictatorship. That's the only thing that ties all of their policies together. So if they win the election at the end of next year, if you have a Democrat House, Democrat Senate, and a Democrat president, they will pack the Supreme Court. They will make their voting law. We will never have a free election again in the United States. The whole U.S. government will be nothing but a sham. It'll be a show. It'll be an empty show, and they'll be running a dictatorship. And the only thing that they're going to leave is, as we put it very mildly, factional resistance, factional strife and conflict. And that's why we're at a tipping point. Because if we don't open our eyes, if we let these people take power at the end of next year, the United States liberty is gone.
Yeah, I guess what you're talking about is basically a point of no return, a very
Correct.
difficult path towards restoration of any kind of civil liberties or rule of law.
Exactly.
Now, yes, I've been speaking with Steve Hecht, our editor at large, our managing editor, and we are with the Impunity Observer, impunityobserver.com. Follow us on Twitter @ObserveImpunity. And we're on Telegram, Facebook, every channel I can think of, to be frank, LinkedIn. Get on there, get our e-newsletter. Impunityobserver.com is the place to be. Thanks for tuning in. Gosh, Steve, we just scratched the surface today. So I really enjoyed chatting with you. And maybe before we let people go, do you want to just give us a little touch? Do you have another article in the works? What's on the tip of your tongue these days?
I had thought about it. It was really difficult to write that last one, and
Sure.
that was only a few days ago. I submitted on Monday. Today is Thursday, and I've been traveling, and I haven't really thought about it. But something is going to come to me, and
will you comment on the Tucker Carlson situation?
I don't know, because we don't know enough about that yet. I mean, it could very well be that, there were some good internal reasons. I mean, people who own Fox, that's their right to get rid of them if that's what they want to do.
Right.
But nobody's going to shut up Tucker Carlson. Will he have that kind of megaphone? I don't know. Probably not, because that's a pretty big one. But if they fired Tucker Carlson because of anything that he said and positions he took, then we're in trouble.
Okay, folks, we'll leave it there. ImpunityObserver.com is the website. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to catching up with you next month. Cheers.